Welcome to Learning Module 8. This week we're talking about Chapter 10, which is the knee joint. Now, let's take a good look at the knee joint. It's actually considered the largest joint in the body. A lot of people think the hip joint is, but if you actually look at the socket that the femoral head sits in, it's actually not as big as the knee joint. It's an extremely complex joint. And also it's primarily a hinge joint. Remember, primarily just flexion and extension. However, I want you to keep in mind though that this joint not only does flexion and extension, but it rotates, internally rotates, externally rotates, and also laterally flexes on either side. So it's really considered a three-dimensional joint, but its primary motion that we know is flexion and extension. Now let's look at some of the bones in it. We have the enlarged femoral condyles that articulate on the tibial plateau. The medial and lateral tibial condyles, here's the tibia, the lower leg, tibial condyles, the medial and lateral heads, or plateaus, they are receptacles for the femoral condyles. And we have the tibia on the medial side. This bears most of the weight from the femur, right? The medial side. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now the fibula, the outside bone, if you look at, this is the right leg, the outside bone on the outside, this bone right here, the fibula, it only serves as attachments for the knee joint structures. It does not articulate at all with the femur or the patella. It's not really part of that, but it's just for muscle or for connective tissue attachment. It's not really part of the knee joint. Now the patella, the kneecap, it's a sesamoid bone or floating bone. You look here, it's right there. It's embedded in the quadriceps and the patellar tendon. So as the quadriceps all come down, they all have one tendon that attaches to the top of the patella. As we go across there, it becomes the patellar ligament and it attaches to the tibial, the fibular tuberosity, the tibia tuberosity, that's where the knee, the quadricep muscles attach at. It serves as a pulley system. So when the quads actually are lengthened and when they shorten, they'll actually pull on the tibia and extend the leg. Now, the patella serves as it's a bone there that increases the moment arm of the quadricep. If this wasn't there, it'd lay almost flat with the bone, with the femur and the tibia. Now, if you put this in there, now the quadricep muscle actually has to go around this, and what it does, it helps increase the moment arm. Remember, moment arm is the perpendicular distance from the axis of rotation to the line of force. Line of force is that way, so it's going to increase this arm in here. So it's going to increase the angle, it's going to increase it. If not, it's just going to lay flat, it's not going to have a lot of force production. But if we increase that angle of pull, it's going to increase that moment arm. It's going to be able to create more force. What it does is increases the mechanical advantage in knee extension. Now, some of the key bony landmarks. We have the superior and inferior patellar poles. Superior meaning top, meaning above. Inferior meaning below, on the patella. We have the tibial tuberosity. Once again, it's right there, it's right below the kneecap, and that's where the quadricep muscles will insert at. We've got the Gerdy's tubercle, which is over here. Remember, it's a raised portion. It's right to the lateral side, or the outside, just outside of the patella. We have the medial and lateral femoral condyles. If we look at that, remember the ends of the bones. Here is the medial on the inside and lateral femoral condyles. and the upper anterior medial tibial surface. In other words, if we look at the lower leg, that's the tibia. The medial, meaning toward the inside, and anterior, meaning above, or the front side. The anterior medial tibial surface. Then we have the head of the fibula, right here. If we look at the outside leg, remember it's not part of the knee joint, but it's for muscle attachment. But here's the head of the fibula. Now we have three vasty muscles of the quadricep. They originate on the proximal femur and insert on the patellar superior pole. The insertion was ultimately on the tibial tuberosity, as we said before. Now the iliotibial tract, up in here, iliotibial tract, it's the side, the connective tissue on the side of the leg of the tensor fasciolata inserts on the Gerdy's tubercle. Remember that tubercle? Right on the outside to the lateral side of the patella. It inserts right there. Now the sartorius, gracilis, and semitendinosus muscle insert just below the medial condyle on the upper and anterior medial tibial surface, right here on the front side. Now the semimembranosus, which is part of the hamstring, inserts posteriorly on the medial side, on the medial tibial condyle. The biceps femoris, which is part of the hamstrings as well, inserts primarily on the tibial head. Now, so we have the semitendinosus on the front side, semimembranosus on the back side, then we got the biceps femoris is on the fibular head. The popliteus muscle inserts on the lateral aspect of the femoral condyle. Here's on the outside. So if we look at from the front side, here's the lateral side. If we look over there, and it'll cross over and attach over here. The tibial collateral ligament originates on the medial aspect of the upper medial femoral condyle and inserts on the medial tibial surface. That's on the inside. The fibular collateral originates on the lateral femoral condyle, very close to the popliteus insertion, right over here, and inserts on the fibular head. So we got the medial collateral and lateral collateral ligaments. Now the knee joint proper, the tibial-femoral joint, is classified as a ginglymus joint, which is a hinge joint, and one of the synovial categories. If you go back to Learning Module 1, we talked about all those categories. It's sometimes referred to as trochoginglymus joint, internal, because it does internal and external rotation, which we talked about before during flexion. Trochoid is a screw-like mechanism. So if it does internal and external rotation, that could be considered a trochoid type of joint, because it actually, when we get to this position, it screws it in, and as soon as we start to do flexion, it rotates and unscrews. So when we do full extension, it screws it in tight, doesn't move, doesn't rotate, doesn't go lateral flex to either side, but as soon as we unextend it, we start to flex the knee joint, we can rotate it and lateral flex. Now there's some argument that this could be a condyloid joint, which means it's a ball and socket, because it does have a tibial plateau, it is concave, these are convex, so depending on who you talk to. It's like with a lot of things, depending on what book you read or what coach you talk to or what scientist you talk to, you're going to get differences of opinion. Now the patellofemoral joint, it's arthroidal. It's a gliding joint. Remember the carpals in the hand? They glide across each other, the bones there. This is the same thing. It's a gliding nature patella on the femoral condyles. Now the ligaments all provide static stability, bone to bone, so they're going to hold that joint together. The quadriceps and hamstrings contractions produce dynamic stability. The articular surfaces on the femur, the articular cartilage surfaces on the femur and tibia They have articular cartilage on the femur, articular cartilage surfaces on the tibia. The meniscus forms cushions between the bones, and the menisci are attached to the tibia. And as it deepens the tibial fossa, which means that the femoral heads will sit in there a little bit better because it's a little deeper, so it provides more stability. Once again, enhances the stability. Now the medial meniscus forms a receptacle for the medial femoral condyle. The lateral meniscus on the outside receives the lateral femoral condyle. It's thicker on the outside border and tapers down very, very thin on the inside. Now this can slip about slightly, but it's held together by various smaller ligaments. Now the medial meniscus is much larger and it has a more of an open C appearance. The lateral meniscus has more of a closed C appearance. So remember, medial has a big C, lateral has a little c. Now either or both menisci may be torn in several different areas from a variety of mechanisms. You've heard a lot of people about, depending on what type of sport, you have a lot of knee injuries and there are a lot of torn menisci, resulting in various degree of problems. Now tears often occur due to significant compression forces. When you push things together, it causes compression. And shear forces. Remember, shearing, they're scraping each other. During rotation, now this is wants to try to rotate. Let me go back. During rotation while flexing or extending during quick directional changes in running. So if you plant your foot and you're trying to change direction, we have compression forces there, and then and the knee wants to slide forward, so that's a shearing force. And then we rotate, so we got the rotating forces during compression as well too. We're flexing there, and then we're turning, we're extending. So you can see all those forces in there. And that knee, remember, it does mostly flexion and extension. There's a little bit of rotation and a little bit of lateral flexing to either side, medial or lateral flexion. But you can see during that movement, if it's too much and the knee buckles in too much or someone gets hit, you can see where all that connective tissue, especially the ligaments, have to hold it in there. The muscles are trying to reduce force so you can change direction. But there's not a lot of movement there. A lot of movement in flexion and extension, but not a lot of movement on rotation and lateral flexion. Now the anterior and posterior cruciate ligaments that crosses the knee between the tibia and femur. Now this is vital in respectively maintaining anterior and posterior stability, forward and backward, as well as rotary stability. Now the anterior cruciate ligament starts on the front and goes to the back and attaches on the back. It keeps the lower leg, the tibia, from sliding forward. It's one of the most common and serious injuries to the knee. Now the mechanism also involves non-contact rotary forces. We talked about that. Rotary force associated with planting and cutting. Hyperextension, when the knee hyperextends, that lower leg wants to shear forward or move forward over the femoral condyles, or by violent quadriceps contraction, which pulls the tibia forward in the femur. So the big thing is you get a lot of those injuries from these types of movement, non-contact rotary forces. Now the posterior cruciate ligament, the PCL, it's not injured very often. The mechanism of direct contact with an opponent or playing surface. So, and that keeps the PCL keeps the femoral head from moving forward. Remember, the ACL keeps the lower leg from sliding forward, and the PCL helps keep the femoral heads from sliding forward on the tibial plateau. Now, the fibular, the lateral side, that's the lateral collateral ligament. That's infrequently injured as well. We don't see a lot of that. We see mostly medial side. Now, the tibia or medial collateral ligaments, the MCL, it maintains medial stability by resisting valgus forces or preventing knee from being abducted. Now, let's look at valgus. Remember, the knees are buckling in. They think, okay, well, it's abducting, but it looks like the upper leg, the femur, is like the end of the femur is going in. But when we look at this, when we talk about valgus, the lower leg and the distal point is moving outward. So that's abduction. Now, if we look at where that stress is, it's on the medial side of the knee. That's the MCL. Injuries occur commonly, particularly in contact or collision sports. So if somebody plants their foot, if you look at soccer, you look at basketball, especially in football, you get hit from the outside. What happens? If you look at the knee, it will buckle in on that side. So you hit them right there, and the knee moves that way. So it's going to stretch that MCL, and that could cause it to tear. Now, mechanism from your teammate or some opponent may fall against the lateral aspect of the knee. On the outside, causing the leg medially, and the medial side opens up of the knee, and that's stress of the MCL ligaments. Now, we also have a synovial cavity. It's a big old capsule that surrounds that in there, and it has a lot of fluid in there, so it helps the knee move more efficiently. Supplies the knee with synovial fluid. It lies underneath the patella, in between the surfaces of the tibia and femur. What we call the capsule of the knee capsule. The infrapatellar fat pad that is just posterior to patella tendon. So we got the quadricep muscle that comes down, the tendon on the superior side of the patella, and it sits right underneath there. That's the infrapatellar fat pad. It's an insertion point for the synovial folds of tissue known as the plica. It's an anatomical variant that may be irritated or inflamed with injuries or overuse of the knee. Now the bursa, there are more than 10 bursa in and around the knee. And all there for is, some are connected to the synovial cavity, but what they do, they help the connective tissue move against each other, and it also is for shock absorption as well too. Because you see certain movement, you get a lot of connective tissue that compresses against each other. Well, these bursas will help dissipate those forces of the compression, and it also helps everything move against each other so it slides accordingly, and there's less friction. Now, if we look at the knee joint, it fully extends to 180 degrees. So if you look at a full circle, half of that circle is 180 degrees. So remember, this is rotary motion. Here's the axis of rotation, and it rotates. It moves in a circle. So it's half of that. So 0 degrees of flexion. So full extension is 180 degrees, 0 flexion. Now we can have some degree of hyperextension. In other words, if that's full extension, it'll actually move 10 degrees this way. 10 degrees or greater, it's not uncommon. If you go back to learning module 1, recurvatum, remember if we look at the lower picture there, we see what they call hyperextension. That can be fairly common. Now flexion occurs to about 140 degrees. With the knee, now we also have to look at too. Once the knee is extended all the way, it's locked. But once we unlock that knee and start flexing, when we get past 30 degrees, we can get internal rotation to about 30 degrees and also get external rotation of 45 degrees depending on what we're doing. Now, I want you to keep in mind though, 140 degrees of flexion. That's quite a bit of movement in there, and we're going to show you how that knee will roll, glide, and slide. If we go back to learning module 1, we already reviewed this. And we talked about full squats and all that. If you have an optimal range of motion of 120 degrees at the hip joint in flexion and 20 to 30 degrees in extension, if we look at the knee joint, up to 140 degrees, and if we look at the foot joint, we'll get to that in the next presentation. We get about 20 degrees of dorsiflexion to about 50 degrees of plantar flexion. If you see that, if you have optimal range of motion to all of this, if you look at like deep squatting movements, it doesn't affect you. It doesn't hurt you, because those connective tissue are passing off their roles to ensure that you get full range of motion at that joint. And also too, for some of you who squat down only to 90 degrees, there's actually more stress on that connective tissue than at a full 140 degrees. Because what happens is, once again, the muscles and all the muscles in there in connective tissue are handing off. Some are passive, some are active, and all that too. Plus, when you get to the bottom of that, as it's rolling and gliding, you get to that certain point there, you actually get some cushion from the calf muscle as well too. This is no joke. This is a documented fact in the training journals and in the research journal. So, if you can have full range of motion through that joint, you can get all that connective tissue muscles to be utilized at its fullest capacity to protect it throughout its entire range of motion. So this, once again, we're trying to dispel a lot of the myths that are currently present in the training industry.